So what does the kingdom of God look like? To what shall we compare the reign of God, and how might we understand what it is like to live in God's way? Well, God's way is a little bit like my first butterfly garden. When I bought my first house out in the Reading area, I inherited an overgrown perennial garden in desperate need of attention. This is it from Google Maps, right here. I had a plan to create another vegetable garden there in that space. Put up big fences to keep the deer out and to be a productive gardener with the full sunlight that it got. I had done gardening in the past, but mostly food gardening, productivity gardening. This one, however, was going to take a lot of work. I spent dozens of hours in that soil, digging up all of the perennials and the weeds and the trees that had been growing in there as well, plus all of the giant roots from the tree behind it, which was cut down that you don't see in that picture. I spent so many hours, digging up weeds, roots, and rocks that I ended up in the chiropractor's office. And despite all of my hard work, after just a few weeks, the weeds were back, and worse than ever. So one year I decided to buy a heavy tarp to solarize the soil. Has anybody ever tried this? Where you put this big tarp over top of it, and it's supposed to heat up in the summer and basically fry all of the weeds and the seeds inside. Now that worked for the weak weeds, but for the strong weeds, it made them stronger. And it only created a little greenhouse. And after the summer, I looked, and there were weeds that had grown up and through the tarp. It saw the tarp, and it said, "Oh, yes, thank you very much. That will help." I wanted to create a productive, organized vegetable garden, but this patch of earth had other plans, and it drove me nuts. It wanted to be wild and free when I wanted it to be productive and manageable. I wanted to make a vegetable garden. It had its own plans. So in the early days of the COVID lockdown, when we weren't allowed to leave our properties, I sat down in the soil and I looked around and I asked it what it wanted to be, because I was so tired in those early days of the pandemic. Nothing was controllable anymore. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I worked twice as hard for maybe 1% of the outcome, and nothing we were doing was helping, and I just felt like nothing was in my control anymore. So I asked it what it wanted to be, what I was missing by insisting on total control, and that's when it hit me. I may own this patch of land. Well, the bank owns that patch of land, and they're letting me live there. But nobody really owns the earth. We live in this complex web of mutuality with the soil and the microbes and the insects and the butterflies and birds and squirrels. Modernity has given us this delusion that we have control over things, but that's just what it is. It's a delusion made more concrete every single time I walk into a climate-controlled room with artificial lights, and every time I purchase food from the grocery store that I did not grow, or mow my perfectly manicured monocultural lawn. But all of that is new. All of that is modern. All of that is wrong. We, friends, are wild animals. Some of us wilder than others. We are born from the soil, and we are given this one and wild life to explore what that means. So compelled by this newly found feeling of wilderness, I took this tiny patch of earth and decided to give it back to the creatures that call this place home. So I made a little path in the middle. I, over here, tried to make a little tiny pond of sorts for toads to come live in. And I planted about a dozen milkweed plants, which is what this ended up being. I loved this place so much that I put an Adirondack chair in the middle, and I used to sit there and be as still as possible so that maybe a butterfly might land on me. I spent so many hours absolutely in love with that little patch of wild, just meeting all of the strange new creatures whose names I didn't know who came to visit. Here also is a bonus picture of toddler Theo watering his toys. Where'd he go? There he is. Not watering the plants, watering his toys. You'll have you see. So then as fall approached, I cut off the seed pods from the milkweed, and I put them on the ground, and I covered them with leaves. I wanted it to grow wild, the way that nature intended it to grow wild, grow the wild way. No incubated seeds anymore, no greenhouses or seedlings, just moving with the cycles and habits of nature, the way that nature has been doing it for millions of years. The last time I tried to plant milkweed, I bought seeds from Amazon, and I put them in the refrigerator for 2 weeks to fool them into thinking that winter had happened, and then planting them outside. But this time, I was just going to let nature do what nature did. And you know what? The next year, there were so many milkweed plants that there was not room for unwanted weeds. It was all wild and wonderful and beautiful. You know, I don't really know how seeds work, though. You sow them, you water them, and then they either grow or they don't, right? And I love that so much. Anybody here ever buy a packet of seeds and like none of them germinated? Yeah, most of you have, right? Do you know why they didn't germinate? I don't either. None of us do. I just love that. I love that so much. This little wild patch of earth taught me so much about how to love the things that I cannot control, and allowing the universe to direct my course instead. I can't make anything grow. All I can do is create the conditions that are best for it to grow. I can put it there. I can make sure the soil is nice and loose and full of nutrients. I can make sure it's got all the water and sunlight it needs, but I cannot make that seed germinate. I cannot make it grow. I cannot make sure that it makes it to adulthood. That is not up to me. All I can do is create the environment and let nature do what nature does. And the kingdom of God is like this. We make plans. We try to control the movement of the Spirit. And then the Spirit does whatever she wants regardless of our plans. We toil and we strain and we try to come up with brand new programs for church outreach efforts, ways to comfort more souls, change more lives, subvert systems, and then we have no control over how any of it is received. We can't change a single person's heart. So we can either stubbornly continue to pull the weeds and insist that our little patch of earth be what we think it should be, or we can stop and listen to what it is teaching us about ourselves instead. We don't know how seeds grow, and we are not responsible for their growth. Our job is to simply make space, to prepare favorable conditions, and then try our best not to get in the way. And that's how we design these worship services, too. I was telling someone yesterday at the Juneteenth event, they asked me how our services are, and I said, I have no idea. I don't know how it's going to pan out day in and day out. We create the spaces, and then we let the Spirit make the seeds grow. I don't know how you're going to interact with the embodied worship. I don't know how you're going to interact in conversation afterwards. I don't know what is going to happen. And that is not just like lazy planning because it's too much work to make everything make sense. That is intentional. These worship services are a way of working out our spirituality together so that when you're on your own, you are better equipped to do it. When you pray, you invite the Spirit to speak to you, and sometimes she does, but a lot of times she doesn't, and all you hear is a frustrated silence. And I'd invite you to consider that maybe those are times that you are trying to make the seed grow instead of letting it work out its own mystery. So I want to tell you one more story of something that happened to me the other day, and then I want to hear how you are working this out in your own life. So there is an ancient tree in Ole, an ancient oak tree called the Sacred Oak of Ole. It has a Facebook page and a Wikipedia page if you want to look it up later. By modern estimates, it is probably about 800 years old, one of the oldest oak trees and one of the largest in North America. It has been a sacred site for over 500 years that we know about. The Lenape felt that this was a special place, one of those thin spaces where the veil between the spirits is permeable, when you can go and one who comes with great respect is able to commune with the great spirits. And the German settlers felt the same way about this space. When they came with their axes and saws and clear-cut the entire region to build farms, they left this tree alone. One of the only ones that they left alone because something was different about that area, that land, that tree. Something in that space was a thin space, a sacred space, a sanctuary built not by human hands, but by nature itself. These days, it is open for public viewing once a year because there were so many people visiting that it was compressing the soil around the roots and actually damaging the tree, which is kind of ironic that a holy place is desecrated by too much activity, and that the best way to preserve it is to let it be. So it's only available to be seen once a year, and you are no longer allowed to go up to it. Now there is kind of a ring around it, and you can just be in the presence of the tree. So a few weeks ago, Anne texted me, actually, and reminded me that the visitation day was that day. And Nicole so kindly offered to watch the boys for an hour so I could drive out to Ole and I could go sit under the branches of this sacred oak. So I went on this beautiful, gorgeous Saturday. You couldn't have asked for a better day. And I went and I found a seat on the grass, and I prepared to still my mind for what I assumed was going to be a super spiritual time in which I was going to connect so deeply and have an amazing transcendent experience. I had planned this on my way there, okay? So I focused my breath. I put my palms on the soil, and I imagined myself drawing from the energy of the earth like the tree itself. I took some deep breaths. I focused on my breath. I listened to the sounds of the babbling brook, of the singing birds, and the whining children. To the sound of a woman loudly playing a drum, despite the people around her asking her to stop. To the sound of chattering tourists remarking on how unfair it was that they weren't allowed to climb the tree anymore. It's already hard enough for me in my normal, quiet life to quiet my mind, to get it to stop moving long enough that I can meditate and be in silence and try to open myself up to the spirit. This is already a struggle to me. I have to go into sensory deprivation tanks to really get there. But here, in this space, it was 10 times harder. And I tried all of the meditation tricks that I've learned over the years, but I just could not stop focusing on my noisy fellow humans. So I gave up. Oh well. If I'm not going to have some amazing spiritual experience, I will just open my eyes and I will just have a nice afternoon sitting in the grass. I will look at birds. I don't know. So I opened my eyes and I noticed something when I did. Something very, very, very small. The smallest spider I had ever seen in my entire life, no bigger than a freckle, was climbing up my arm, traversing over these arm hairs like a monkey swinging through a jungle. And I couldn't help but think, what does the world look like to this freckle-sized spider? Am I like this tree to this spider? Does it know that it is currently living under a space that humans have worshipped for 1,000 years? Does it know that this is a thin space between the realms? Or does it care? Is that even relevant to a spider? And I'm watching this thing as it climbs up my arm, and it goes up to the top of my finger, and it kind of does this thing where it spins around a few times, and it arches its back in a way I've never seen, like a cat that's about to lay down in the sunshine. But then it goes back down my finger, and it goes up my middle finger at that point and does the same sort of dance. It turns around a few times, stretches its back, and then, as if by magic, jumped over back here. And I realized that it didn't jump, it crawled across its web that it had started making between my first and second fingers. I realized that it wasn't exploring, it was building a web. I had to become so still that it mistook me for landscape and deemed me worthy of a place to create its home. What an honor. I have never been a home to a spider before. That I know of, sure. It was so small it wasn't a creepy spider, don't worry. Nicole's here. Welcome. She knows this story. So I kept as still as possible, watching this unbelievably tiny creature spin a web whose design is built into its DNA, whose very strands and shapes are older than humanity itself. And I forgot about the whining toddler and the obnoxious dancing hippie. And I forgot about the tree and the babbling brook. And I forgot about all of those things that mattered to me so much before. And I think I honestly spent about 15 or 20 minutes watching this tiny spider on my hand. And after that time, it occurred to me that I didn't know what kind of spider she was. And I knew her movements, and I knew her personality, and I knew what she was doing, and I could tell these kind of strange little movements that she would do. I felt like I knew her, but I didn't know her species. I didn't know what to call her. What's the scientific name for this? What is the range of their population, all of those sorts of facts and figures that I cling to so very much. So after a few moments of debate, I decided to pull out my phone and open the iNaturalist app so that I could figure out what kind it was and that I could know more about it. And in the 2 seconds that it took me to pull out my phone, it was gone. Its web left unfinished between my fingers. I knew that spider. I knew her by her movements, by her little personality. And I knew her better than I could have possibly known by reading her Wikipedia article about her species and knowing what Latin names some guys gave her at some point. But my incessant desire to know, to understand, and to control everything reduced that moment to nothing. I had come to that sacred space with an agenda, and it refused my demand for expedient transcendence. Then, when I accidentally stumbled in through the back door of enlightenment, I tried to fit that into a category that I could understand, and it vanished. I wonder if you can relate to this. Whether in your spiritual life or maybe as a parent or a pet owner or whatever it is, it seems that the harder we try to make something work the way we want it to work, the less it actually does. In the kingdom of God, all we can do is plant the seed and create the space for it to grow, but the actual growth happens on a timetable that is unknown to us. The magic of seeds is hidden from us. And that is so frustrating to people like me who like to control the outcomes as best as I can. But how about you? How have you found this to be true? Have you found that your spiritual life runs into a brick wall when you're being intentional about making it happen? Have you found that you are able to best find the Spirit when you're not trying? How have you been surprised in these sorts of ways.